interesting is, you talk about Ethiopian coffee. I'm not the biggest coffee connoisseur, but that's very unique. Like I met a gentleman who ran a black coffee company based in Kansas City at Commerce Week for Brand Week, and I'm like, wow, like a black guy owns coffee in the
Coffee Black,
right,
right?
right,
Yeah.
and I was like, wow, that was just impressed. So you start bringing coffee from other parts of the globe and places that people can't point on the U.S. map. You have to tell the story as to why you matter, what's differentiating, in particular when the bias is the great coffee comes out of Latin America. So you have to create the distinction between, like everyone knows Colombian coffee is probably one of the strongest. Like you got to know what you're doing. You're rocking with Colombian. So these stigmas help propel their market penetration. So if there's even a good stigma you can put to the coffee that you're representing from this particular country, like you want to lean into that. You want to talk about how that's coming stateside, how that's going to be new part of the connoisseur's taste bud. That coffee is really a global expansion business that really supports 20 countries, not the U.S. and a few in Latin America. Like people have no idea. So there's a huge education opportunity. Even you got to treat it like wine. There are wineries everywhere. They're not just like we got wineries here in Maryland. We got them out here in Virginia, West Virginia. I mean, they're all over the globe because people figured out how to create the soil for it. So the local wines have charms now, the same way international coffee has charm. So you have to really lean into that. I think when you start to look at businesses you deal with, you have to understand that certain grocery stores like a Publix or Giant, they want a Starbucks. Like they want a massive brand that can match their footprint of expansion and demand. They're looking for someone who's equally yoked on the supply chain to put their stuff on the same trucks. That is a direct strategic business alignment. But you could look at a boutique strip mall that's not about chains, that has unique indie brands, more independence, and say that is where we can live, because that's what you find. There's a reason that a lot of the Pete's Coffee are in the airports on the West Coast, less to the East Coast, and a lot of that is the displacement between Starbucks, but that is part of their channel strategy. It's an airport strategy or public transportation strategy. You need to look at your strategy based on the connoisseur. If it's an international coffee and has galvanized the American populace, you may have to set up footprint where there's very much an international, more or less, population. So your brand may do well in Maryland because Maryland, Montgomery County is very much an international marketplace. You may not do well in a rural area where people just buy a U.S. brand and they're still buying some of the stuff we've seen from the 80s. You have to be very intentional about that, about who's going to help evangelize the uniqueness of it. But I think you have to look at suitors that like what you represent because they themselves represent it the same way. You may look at soft targets. Like every coffee company doesn't want to be in a outlet mall because outlet malls have a different ethos of shopper profile. So I do see Starbucks in a lot of them now, but in the beginning they had nothing. But you may decide that that's a soft strategy. You may say, look, we're the outdoor mall brand. So you go to some of the outdoor malls on the West Coast between Arizona, Nevada, Southern Cal, and say, in Miami, like that's where we play because that's the kind of culture we cultivate. And that's the populace of people who be very sort of receptive to it. I think you need to be very clear about who you are and who you aren't. The other thing is all brands have limitations. They do. So a coffee brand from the continent of Africa has limitations because people don't know about coffee from Africa. Your job is to educate and bring them on the level, but you just have to understand that certain people like I don't know anything about that. I'm just going to go with what we know because again they're managing risk. So some of those factors. The other thing is you just may find an opportunity where, like the same way Colombian coffee came in and really penetrated, you could do the same. You should look at their strategy and how it's done. And half of their word of mouth narrative are people who are Colombian talking about, no, we make the boldest coffee. Like we're at the summit of that. And I don't know if you have the representation to do that, but maybe it's people who are just from Africa, period, who just know the coffee from that particular region. You have to start to look at what are the voices that are going to put you in the rooms of consideration when you can't be in the room of consideration yourself. And that's not only from a business standpoint, that's almost also from a consumer standpoint. I think most people just don't realize you have to activate voices that openly advocate for the means which you matter. You may decide, look, we want to be in major skyscrapers, major offices in New York City, because Starbucks doesn't want that. They don't meet the foot traffic numbers, but you should understand the economics of what makes a Starbucks profitable, meaning certain amount of turn, we call it, that has to happen between how much product is sold for it to be profitable. And you're like, oh, I can make that model work. They can't. So now I'm a suitor for this building, for this office community or whatever, that if Starbucks or Dunkin' Donuts says, nah, no thanks. So you have to
Okay.
study those dynamics to find the white spaces you can be integrated in as well.